During the 80s, the Medellin Cartel meant only one name: Pablo Escobar. The King of Colombian Snow is often credited as the sole power behind one of the biggest organizations to smuggle drugs in the USA. There is no doubt the ruthlessness and ambitious nature of Pablo Escobar was the driving force behind the Medellin Cartel's rise. But it is also true that he was too hot-headed and paranoid to keep the Medellin Cartel on top of the game for as long as it managed to stay there. So the question is, who was the real mastermind behind the Medellin Cartel's immense success? Welcome to Nutty History, and today let's tell the untold story of Gustavo Gaviria, the brains of the Medellin Cartel.
Plata o plomo.
Lead or silver. Under Pablo Escobar and Gustavo Gaviria's leadership, the Medellin Cartel had a simple philosophy to solve every problem: bullet or bribe. Either one would graciously take silver, as in money, willingly, and let the Medellin Cartel have their way, or they would be removed out of the cartel's way, with a lead bullet eliminating them. But the saying plata o plomo had another layer of meaning to it. As a person who was given this choice, one was not just choosing the method but also the person they would like to deal with. Plata, or lead, meant they would be getting a visit from Escobar himself, and that would be the last person they would ever meet for obvious reasons. However, if they chose plomo, that meant they opted to deal with Gaviria instead, who would be bringing money to them along with his terms of conditions and expectations that the cartel had for them. According to Stephen Murphy, the former DEA agent who played a crucial role in bringing Pablo's empire down, the authorities wanted to capture Gaviria alive because he was the true brains of the operation. He knew all about the labs, where to get the chemicals, the transportation routes, and most importantly, the distribution hubs throughout the United States and Europe. While Escobar caught all the heat during the peak years of the Medellin Cartel from 1976 to 1993, Gaviria comfortably lurked in his cousin's shadow, expanding and enriching the operation of their joint empire. By letting Escobar be the poster boy for the narcos, Gaviria ran the operation as silently and smoothly as possible, overseeing both production and finance all at once to take the cartel's turnover above $4 billion per year. Gaviria was also the front man for all the legitimate businesses owned by Escobar and the Medellin Cartel. That's why it's a shame the DEA couldn't accomplish extraditing him. In August 1990, Gaviria was allegedly taken down in an encounter with the Colombian police. This was the beginning of the end for Pablo Escobar. Without the efficient leadership of Gaviria to temper Escobar's aggression, the Medellin Cartel spiraled to its fall, and Pablo Escobar was terminated 3 years later on the roof of a house in Medellin. Interestingly, the police statement failed to provide details about how they located Gaviria in an apartment, which was equipped with bullet-resistant windows. There were accusations made by Pablo Escobar that Gaviria didn't die in a gunfight with the Colombian authorities, but was captured alive, tortured, and executed in police custody. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We cannot end the story without telling how it began. Gustavo de Jesus Gaviria Rivero was born on December 25, 1946. His cousin, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, came into the world almost exactly 3 years later, on December 1, 1949. Both cousins grew up in Envigado, a town southeast of Medellin. Envigado is located in the metropolitan area of the Aburra Valley, and that means both of these men came from decent families. Their parents were well educated and had established households. There was no reason for either Gaviria or Escobar to be desperate to leave school and pursue a career in crime. It was deliberate, and for their parents, a shocking decision. The two started as petty thugs. Escobar knew how to spot an opportunity, and Gaviria was the one to make the best of the given opportunity. They started with petty thievery, such as stealing tires from cars, and then jumped up to jacking cars and robbing cinema box offices in the early 70s. In desperate times, they would also resort to stealing headstones from graveyards and holding them for ransom. Eventually, they became daring enough to begin kidnapping people for ransom. One of their first jobs was the kidnapping and decimation of Mr. Diego Echevarria Misas, one of the most powerful and millionaire industrialists in the city of Medellin, and owner of the textile branch company, hotheaded. By the mid-70s, the two cousins were robbing banks and smuggling household appliances, and their rap sheet had become too long to not be noticed by the authorities. Both cousins were hunted and arrested, but instead of learning their lessons, Gaviria and Escobar treated their visit to jail as their graduation ceremony in the world of crime. When the two were released, they had a new purpose. Things changed, and their appetite was far bigger than whatever robbing headstones from graveyards could fetch them. Douglas Farah, a journalist who eyewitnessed Escobar's rise in Medellin, admitted that there was a change of wind on the city streets after Escobar and Gaviria came back and vowed to essentially build everything together. Escobar had his eyes on the drug business for a while now, as he had been observing the migration of the Snow White trade northwards from Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Gustavo Gaviria turned out to be a great connoisseur of the international drug trafficking routes, and he helped Escobar to smuggle cocoa paste into Colombia. Gaviria and Escobar would refine it into nose candy and have it sent north with mules to be sold into the United States. Here again, Gaviria helped determine the safest routes for smuggling. On one occasion, one of the cargoes was established in the municipality of Itagüí. Both Pablo Escobar and Gustavo Gaviria were in prison for this in a penitentiary center in Pasto, Nariño. They were set free only a couple of months later, after Gaviria paid a high sum of money to the judge who followed their case. From that moment, Gaviria insisted to Escobar that they should build their own laboratories in Colombia, bringing the cocoa paste from Ecuador and Peru. Later, they would meet the Ochoa brothers, Carlos Leder and Gonzalo Rodriguez Cacha, and they founded the Medellin Cartel. Escobar was the undisputed leader of the operation, but Gaviria handled the finances and exportation of cocaine behind the scenes. According to former DEA officer Javier Peña, who tracked Escobar from 1988 until the drug lord's death in 1993, Gustavo Gaviria was the backbone of the cartel. Taking down Escobar first would not have had the same effect on the Medellin Cartel if Gustavo Gaviria was still alive, as he could have kept the operations running without breaking a sweat. There was a clear divide between the working methods of Gustavo Gaviria and Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar was the center of power. He focused on fear and violence that was necessary to keep everybody in line in the happy powder trade. His charisma helped inspire his army of sicarios, or hitmen. Anyone who disobeyed Escobar's orders was intimidated or eliminated by violence. Gustavo Gaviria, on the other hand, was all about money. He ran their Snow White operation like a legitimate business and was the go-to man to solve problems that couldn't be solved with bullets. For instance, when one of the cartel's main trade routes that went through the Bahamas to Florida was disrupted, Gaviria didn't panic. He got creative. He abandoned the traditional methods of flying Colombian snow to the U.S. and instead chose a more discreet method to smuggle them. Gaviria employed legitimate cargo ships carrying appliances, and the precious and dangerous white gold was stuffed into refrigerators and televisions. According to the Wall Street Journal, another technique employed was hiding the drug in fruits like avocado and Guatemalan fruit pulp, as well as Ecuadorian cocoa, Chilean wine, and Peruvian dried fish. The smugglers even went as far as soaking cocaine into blue jeans. Once the jeans arrived in the U.S., chemists pulled the drug out of the denim. Under Gaviria's leadership, the cartel was making money hand over fist. A kilo of Snow White would cost only $1,000 to manufacture, but was selling at a price of up to $70,000 in the U.S. Even flying the happy powder to the north was resumed later, but now pilots would carry the drug one way to the north, ditch their planes in the ocean, and then they swam to wait for ships in U.S. waters. By the mid-1980s, the Medellin Cartel was raking in up to $60 million per day. At the height of their power, Pablo Escobar and Gustavo Gaviria had cornered 80% of the blow supply in the United States. But Gaviria wasn't satisfied. According to Peña, he was making contacts all over the world to make the Medellin Cartel the top global supplier of Colombian snow. By accounts of Gaviria's closest lieutenants, even though the world was astonished at how much wealth Pablo Escobar had accumulated by smuggling drugs in the U.S., his riches were still lacking in comparison to Gaviria's estimated amount of assets. Gustavo Gaviria had investments in works of art, properties in Medellin like the Hacienda Nápoles, stocks in 50% partnership with his cousin, diamonds, luxury cars, planes, helicopters, and bank accounts abroad in countries like Switzerland. As Gaviria's contribution to the cartel was slightly clandestine than his loudmouth cousin, He was able to take vacations in Europe, drive high-speed cars, which he was quite good at. He would compete in car races, and he loved to taste wines from all over the world. By the 1980s, the Medellin Cartel had nowhere to hide. Thanks to Escobar's antiques, Pablo Escobar was trying to create an aura of legitimacy around himself and his business. He became a Colombian Robin Hood and built schools, a soccer stadium, and housing for the poor. With the immense support of the common masses behind him, Escobar desired to get into politics. Gustavo Gaviria wasn't happy about that, but Pablo was drunk on power and he did not heed Gaviria's advice. In 1982, Escobar was elected to the Colombian parliament and already had dreams of running for president one day. With the campaign trail and then becoming a member of parliament, he was unable to focus on the business, and that allowed Gaviria to take full reins of the operation into his own hands. Gaviria was quite happy to have full control of the business, with Pablo Escobar fulfilling his power fantasies in the parliament. Gaviria's focus was entirely on making more money, but then Escobar got kicked out of parliament by Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla due to his activity in the drug trade. Bonilla threatened to go after the Medellin Cartel, but the poor man ultimately paid with his life. This was the final straw. The gloves came off and the Colombian government declared war on the Medellin Cartel. Now, this conflict claimed the lives of many politicians as the Medellin Cartel retaliated by destroying planes and government buildings, but then the unthinkable happened. On August 11, 1990, the police tracked down Gustavo Gaviria in a high-end Medellin neighborhood and downed him. According to some accounts, it was the Ochoa brothers who ratted out his location because Gaviria was seeing their sister Marina. Also, before Gaviria was executed, he was put in a truck and taken to a parking garage and tortured. The Colombian authorities tried to force him to reveal Escobar's whereabouts, but Gaviria was loyal to his cousin to the end. He gave up on life before he would give up on his cousin. His tortured body was dumped in the Sabaneta neighborhood while his death was tied to a police encounter. The death of his cousin left a deep mark on Pablo Escobar. Feeling angry and helpless, Pablo refused to attend Gaviria's funeral and had the service recorded so he could listen to it on the radio. This was the darkest time for Pablo Escobar. While mourning, he came very close to surrendering himself and his entire operation, but on his own terms. He wanted to stay in his own jail at La Catedral and be guarded by his own security forces. The death of Gaviria sent shockwaves across Colombia, but marked the beginning of the end for the Medellin Cartel and Pablo Escobar. He was the brain of the cartel, and his death showed the fracture within the cartel. Pablo Escobar was eventually taken out in 1993, like his cousin. Which other narcos would you like us to cover in this series? Tell us in the comments, and thanks for watching Nutty History.